Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV programmes. In this video we're taking a look at the first episode of the second season of House of the Dragon. Let's jump straight in. The new season picks up shortly after the events of Season 1, and we're back in the north, listening to someone who sounds like a Sean Bean tribute act, who we later find out is Lord Cregan Stark. He reminds us all how much they love getting cold and staring off into the distance on the massive ice wall they built up in the north. Once he's done monologuing, Cregan has a meeting with Jace, who's come to get the Stark household to back his family in the Greens versus Black War for the Iron Throne. They have a strange sort of flirty conversation about history, and Cregan agrees that he's not going to break his oath to Jace's mother, but equally he can't risk sending men down south when their main job is protecting people from the mysterious threat that lies beyond the wall, which isn't all that mysterious to anyone who watched the 8 seasons of the original Game of Thrones, but we can pretend that we don't know what he's on about. As a compromise, Cregan offers up loads of old guys who he doesn't think will last out the winter. While I suppose experience is always useful in a battle situation, I'm not sure I'd have agreed to this offer quite as willingly as Jace does here. If you ever watched the British sitcom Dad's Army, you know that old guys are always useful in a wartime situation. The fun back and forth between these two is brought to a swift close when a raven brings a message from Dragonstone with news of Jace's brother's brutal ending to last season. And next it's off to Dragonstone for a great scene with Daemon and Rhaenys. He tells her that they both have to fly straight to King's Landing on their dragons to kill Aemond and his dragon Vhagar, who's the biggest and meanest of all the dragons. Rhaenys has been single-handedly enforcing a blockade on the sea with her dragons and needs a nap and something to eat, so she slaps down Daemon's request. Not just because she's tired though, but also because he's not the boss of her, and she lets him know this quite clearly. We find out from their confrontation that Rhaenyra is currently AWOL, while she copes with the grief of losing a son. Rhaenys is sympathetic to this, but Daemon's bloodlust has made him itchy to act and frustrated that the Queen isn't around to dish out orders and take command. We then see Queen Rhaenyra looking racked with grief on a cliff top somewhere. She's searching for the remains of her son, or his dragon, as proof that they've definitely died. In King's Landing we see King Aegon getting used to his new job, and one thing he's keen to do is get his son involved in the family business straight away. He asks his wife/sister where little Jaehaerys is because he wants to take him to the small council meeting. It seems a bit silly to take a toddler to this sort of meeting, but when you consider Aegon's completely ill-equipped for the role he currently finds himself in, mostly because his own father never bothered to show him the ropes, it shows he's at least trying to avoid the mistakes Viserys made with him. Then Queen Helaena says that she's scared of rats, which Aegon laughs off as nonsense talk, but we see later that he should have paid more attention to her. Yet another queen, the third one by my count, Queen Alicent, is getting the kind of intimate bodyguarding from Sir Criston Cole that suggests he's taking his vow of celibacy as more of a suggestion than a solemn oath. She tells him that it must never happen again, in just the same way I pretend I'm just going to have one biscuit, yet somehow the whole packet disappears. At the small council meeting, King Aegon isn't taking the business very seriously. Instead he has more fun taunting Tywin Lannister, who's trying his best not to be irked by the appallingly behaved little Jaehaerys. Then he suggests Tywin give the heir to the throne a pony ride, which Queen Alicent disappointingly shuts down. I'm too classy to make crude jokes about her and Criston Cole doing something similar in the previous scene, so you have to make your own joke about pony rides up here. The small council meetings are a bit of a mess, with Aegon, Aemond and Criston Cole full of aggressive ideas, and Queen Alicent and Otto Hightower trying to rein them back in, while the others garble endless names of various families that will or won't be loyal to them. Otto Hightower was a lot more fun when he was gurning in his pants in Notting Hill. On the way back from the small council, Queen Alicent bumps into Lord Larys, the clubfoot strong. I'll add in here, I'm taking that name from IMDb, I'm not just mocking someone for the disability. Clearly George R.R. Martin had no such qualms when creating his character names though. He's annoyed with Alicent because she was busy when he went to visit her before the small council meeting. Getting busy, in fact. She looks panicked because Larys is the type of person who knows everyone's dirty business. Anyway, Larys wanted to catch up with her because he found out who were the spies of Alicent's staff and killed them all. He's now replaced them with his own hand-picked group of employees. Personally, I'm not sure I'd trust the creepy guy with a foot fetish to choose the people who scrub my back, or wash my feet. Alicent must be thinking along the same lines, as in the next scene she sends away her staff and washes herself in the bath. The indignity of it, having to wash yourself. Next we see Rhaenyra freak out some villagers when she lands a dragon on a beach, and she finds a dragon wing and her son's cloak. It's the evidence she needs, and Emma Darcy shows their acting ability by pouring out all Rhaenyra's grief on the beach. Over in King's Landing, King Aegon is having a go at doing his job by receiving an audience. It doesn't go all that well. Strangely though, after being an awful human being in the last season, the problem now is that he's too nice. He listens to people's problems and wants to help them, which any politician will tell you is a terrible idea. Otto Hightower does his best to try and guide him, but Aegon obviously wants to be a nice guy, which isn't something anyone saw coming last season. As he's walking through the castle, Aegon is pulled to one side by Larys Strong, who whispers poison in his ear about his grandfather, the Hand, sowing seeds of doubt and suggesting he's no good as Hand of the King. It's only a brief conversation, but this feels like the start of a series of conversations that ends with Larys Strong gaining Aegon's trust and attempting to either become the Hand of the King himself or installing someone he prefers in the role. Next up, Otto and Alicent have some daddy-daughter time together. Alicent is frustrated that Otto is undermining her, and Otto is frustrated that things aren't going to plan. Alicent shares that her plan is to let Aegon enjoy being king until he gets bored of it, then they can swoop in and take control of things. Otto agrees with this plan, but points out that violence is the only way to achieve their goal. which she agrees with but suggests it doesn't need to be wanton. Otto sort of agrees with the point, but it's one of those agree to disagree kind of things, where he doesn't sound like he even half means it. So fans of wanton violence can probably see this as a good sign for future episodes. The White Worm is discovered aboard a ship by one of those twin knights, the one on the black side, and delivered to Damon. She's called Marissa the White Worm and knows all sorts of secrets, so it's a very useful person to have on your side. They also seem to have worked out what they want to do with her accent a bit more in this series. Rhaenyra returns from her travels and gives only 4 words of instruction. I want Aemon Targaryen, which I'm pretty sure doesn't mean that she wants him around for tea and scones. Damon is delighted to have the green light to indulge his bloodlust, so goes back to the White Worm and negotiates with her for information to smuggle his way into King's Landing and into the Red Keep, the castle where the royal family live. Then there's a sad scene where Jace tries to act grown up and give a brief on his activities, but breaks down because he needs to share his grief with his mother, which then cuts into a funeral scene, which is intercut with Alicent lighting candles to remember the dead too, reminding us that both sides of this conflict are related and every loss is shared on both sides. Damon then arrives in King's Landing on a rowboat with a cloak covering his hair. Not the best disguise given he's one of the most recognisable people in this world, but we're supposed to believe that nobody would spot him like this, so we just have to go along with it. He bribes a guard to get in, which makes sense because he used to command the City Watch. Then Damon recruits this guard to his cause. Next he meets a rat catcher who the White Worm told him about, who knows all the ins and outs of the Red Keep, and can help him get to the chambers of the royal family. Damon wants him to sneak in and kill Aemon Targaryen. The rat catcher asks him what they should do if they can't find him, but it cuts away before Damon gives his response. Aemon and Kristen Cole are playing war games with a map and some little counters until Grandad Otto comes in and spoils the fun. He sends Kristen to do his actual job, watching for threats, and tells Aemon that he needs to calm down a bit. Aemon seems unimpressed by this kind of talk. The City Watch guard and the rat catcher, who are called Blood and Cheese, sneak into the castle with the rat catching dog. Allegedly they get into the castle thanks to Cheese the rat catcher's inside knowledge, though it looks pretty straightforward from the scenes we're shown. So simple in fact that they accidentally stumble across King Aegon and a few of his mates having a late night drinking session on the Iron Throne. They don't get noticed though, because the others are too busy boozing and complaining about Aegon being known as Aegon the Magnanimous. If you had any doubts about Blood the City Guard being a nasty piece of work, it's confirmed when he kicks the dog. There have been some horrendous acts of violence committed in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, but I honestly don't think I've been as upset by anything as that unexpected moment of cruelty. What a scumbag. Anyway, Chi shows him the way to the royal quarters, but they can't find Aemond. Instead they come across Queen Helena. She won't do though, because their instructions are to kill her son. They discover 2 sleeping children, one a boy, one a girl, so they make Helena tell them which one is a boy. She points him out to them, and he meets her horrendous end, while the Queen runs off with a little girl to safety. We don't see what they do, but the sound effects are horrendous. She runs down to her mother's chambers to safety. Alicent asks what happened, and Helena tells her that they killed her boy. All the while, Kristen Cole is rapidly putting his clothes on, and most likely trying to think of excuses as to why he was in Alicent's bed and not keeping watch over the royal family during a time of war. Maybe he tripped, fell, and all his armour dropped off, and he stumbled into Queen Alicent's bed. That might work. That was a brutal ending to the first episode back. I thought there wasn't going to be a great deal happening in that episode, and then suddenly, right at the close, a horrendous act of violence against a defenceless child. I'm not complaining about the lack of action though. I enjoyed this episode and thought it was a good season opener, as it set up the pieces of the puzzle of this season nicely and gave us an idea about how things are likely to play out. It's not exactly a controversial opinion to say that I like the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones more than the later ones. I think the reason most people like those ones more was because every big battle or sword fight was built up to with underlying story that meant you were invested with the characters. As Game of Thrones went along, it got too focused on these huge action set pieces, and the story often got pushed aside. So it wasn't such a bad thing to give the characters a bit of room to breathe in this episode, and to get to know them a bit more. I was particularly impressed with how the writing seemed to have come along, and we were given a bit more depth to the King Aegon character in this episode, who was pretty one-dimensional and chaotic in the first season. But now he seems just as chaotic, but more rounded and potentially more entertaining too. There's also a lot more intrigue in the King's Landing side of the story, with Otto Hightower and Alicent and Larys scheming, while Aegon, Aemond and Kristen seem to be more bent on a blunt force approach to solving their problems, both inside and outside the castle. Things seem a bit more aligned on Rhaenyra's side of things for now, with the only real friction coming between Daemon and Rhaenyra, as both feel like they've been passed over for the Iron Throne and carrying an entitled and embittered energy about them, which sparks nicely when they come up against each other. For now though, it seems that both of them are keeping their powder dry in their hostility towards each other, and are uniting behind Rhaenyra. I could be way off, but my impression is that the whole House of Dragon series is about how Alicent and Rhaenyra are women who in theory have a lot of power in their respective sides of the family dispute, but in practice they are constantly being undermined by the impulsive men that they're related to. Rhaenyra has Daemon, Corlys, and eventually even Jace may need handling. Alicent has a whole host of guys that need careful management. Her dad, 2 sons, Kristen Cole, Larys, they all want something from her, and they can all cause her problems. In terms of my review, I think this was a good start. I thought Emma Darcy's performance was absolutely stunning in this episode. They captured her mother's grief beautifully, while only delivering 4 lines of dialogue in the whole episode. I also love Tom Glencarny as King Aegon, after not thinking he was anything all that special last season. He's got a very expressive face, so you can see all the vulnerability, anger, entitlement, and greed play across it without him saying much at all. He's also really funny too, in a kind of David Brent from The Office sort of way. I think my least favourite bit of the episode was the blood and cheese bit, which I suppose is part of the story. It's in the books, it's part of how things advance. It's not just how brutal that scene was, but also how it felt a bit mishandled too. The scene where Helena had to point out which of the children was a boy got a bit muddled in translation from the books, and didn't quite work as it should in my opinion. And the kicking of the dog, well, I'm sure no dogs were actually harmed, I just didn't want to see that kind of thing. I appreciate how daft that is, given the hundreds and most likely thousands of human deaths there are across this series and Game of Thrones, but I'm going to stick to my irrational position that no dog should be kicked on television, regardless of any logic. When the first season of House of Dragons finished, I was left feeling that I'd watched a very long prologue to the war between these two sides. This episode didn't dump us straight into that war, but it did feel like a ratcheting up of the tension, which was great to watch. While the main function of this episode was to move the pieces around the chessboard and set up the conflict that will pay off later in the season, I still enjoyed the scenes that we needed to watch to achieve this goal. Another good thing about this episode is that it got me excited for the rest of the season, which hopefully will be even better than this episode. My favourite line in this episode came from King Aegon when he said, "The Queen is an enduring mystery, is she not?" as he dismissed her warning about the rats and walked off. When he said that she was an enduring mystery, what he really meant was that she talks nonsense, and I'm not in the least bit interested. If he'd listened more carefully, he may have understood the danger his son was in, but he has almost no interest in his sister/wife. The deadpan way he delivered the line was superb, and I was pleased to see that this episode had some really humorous moments in it, as I find that fantasy stories often take themselves way too seriously. Thought I'd add a new section into my videos about House of the Dragon, as there's a constant power struggle and most episodes the balance of power swings from one way to another. So each episode I'll pick one winner and one loser based on the events of the episode. So based on this week's episode, I think King Aegon was the biggest winner. He's now on the Iron Throne, he's getting to boss lords around in the small council, and he's even taking advice from people and getting rid of his granddad as the Hand of the King. While he's a bit wet behind the ears and learning on the job, this was a relatively good week for Aegon, which is rare when you're at the top of the heap and everyone wants your job. The biggest loser this week has to be Criston Cole, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, and the horniest knight that's ever took a vow of celibacy. Or I suppose if you've already broken your vow of celibacy once when you should have been on guard, are you even a celibate guard anymore? Or are you just a guy that lurks near women's bedchambers late at night waiting for opportunities to abandon your post and indulge your desires? The whole celibacy thing seemed a bit extreme to get knights to sign up to, and I'm starting to see why it's needed, given Criston Cole's short break from his guard duty most likely left the way open for blood and cheese to commit their crimes. Even if Criston Cole wasn't meant to be guarding Helena specifically, it's conceivable that he might have sent away guards so they didn't see him creeping about Queen Alicent's bedchambers late at night, so I'm blaming Sir Criston, at least in part, for what's gone on. I wonder if anyone else will too, or if there'll be a cover-up. Aegon is announced as Aegon the Magnanimous, which he complains that no one will know what it means. If you weren't sure, Dictionary.com defines it as generous in forgiving an insult or injury, free from petty resentfulness or vindictiveness, which I guess hints towards him offering terms to his half-sister rather than ordering her death. Aegon's idea of Dragonheart, or Dragon something else, sounded a lot better, but it's never a great idea to pick your own nickname. It sounds a bit desperate. Better to earn it through your own actions. Did you notice the new introduction sequence? Last season it was a family tree sort of thing around the Targaryen family with cogs, but now it's more of an evolving tapestry sort of thing, which I suspect will evolve as the story develops over time. A bit like the Game of Thrones clockwork map-based introduction changed as the seasons changed. Though Daemon and Viserys aren't likely to be that interested in it, if anyone remembers their thoughts about tapestries from the last season. Promote the new season of House of the Dragons, Sky TV in New Zealand put some sheep in armour, because sheep are a favourite snack of dragons, though it seems that this market has only protected 2 of them, so the country's other 25 million sheep are completely unprotected. Someone on Twitter pointed out that Jace underwent a pretty dramatic hair growth and glow up in the 2 weeks or so between season 1 and 2 in the story. Maybe he swung by a hair salon on his way up to the wall and had some hair extensions put in. I don't think the reaction to the events at the end of this episode will be that each side will see that losing once in each makes them both equal, so it's all square. So we're likely going to spend some time next episode dealing with the fallout of Blood and Cheese's escapades. It may be that the nice guy phase of King Aegon will be over now that he's got a bereavement to deal with. So Criston may also have some security questions to answer. Daemon may or may not be impressed by the decisions Blood and Cheese made when they couldn't find Aemond. It was left open whether they were operating under his instructions or not. Then there'll be Rhaenyra's reaction to all this too, as she sees herself as a decent person, but this action was carried out in her name. I doubt she'll be pleased to be associated with such a brutal act. So all this has to be unpacked in the next episode before you even start to look at the bigger picture of the wrestle for the Iron Throne. There'll be most likely some more wrangling over different houses' loyalties and control for the certain territories. I have a feeling that, after a relatively restrained season opener, there's likely to be some big action set pieces too, as there's never a big gap between a huge battle or fight in this series. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you've enjoyed it. If this is the sort of video you'd like to see more of in your YouTube feed, then please subscribe to make sure you don't miss the next one. I plan on making more videos for this season of House of the Dragon, so subscribing is the best way to make sure you don't miss them. Goodbye.